This is The Conspiracy of Man, a video series about Jesus, the man. Not Jesus, the Christ, or anointed Son of God of Christian myth, but Jesus, the man, who proclaimed himself the Son of Man. This is the story of who Jesus actually was and what he actually did. The Conspiracy of Man is a story about the Essene conspiracy to bring down the temple, using Jesus to fulfill the laws of the blood sacrifice, ancient laws ostensibly established by Moses with YHVH. By offering himself up as the final blood sacrifice of the Paschal lamb, Jesus brought the entire sacrificial system into question. The focus of this video will be on the Gospels, as that is where the actual story lies. Everything outside the Gospels is Christian myth and revisionism. In fact, the Gospels themselves were radically revised by Christian mythmakers. Yet truth remains hidden within these accounts. The Gospel is the only narrative in the New Testament that contains the actual elements of truth about Jesus. The rest is myth and religious propaganda. To begin, one must understand how and why the Gospels came about, as this provides the key to their truths. The Gospels began as an oral tradition, and were not committed to the written word until perhaps a half-century or more after the actual events. Until then, the Gospels remained an oral tradition that in time grew into legend. Like other notable historical events of legend, the Gospels began when people, profoundly affected by the events, began circulating stories among their community about what happened, embellishing their stories of both characters and events. So the question is, who were the original storytellers, and what was the actual story they told? That question can be answered by the story itself that describes the people profoundly affected by the events. The real story of Jesus is in fact a common one. It is an age-old, oft-repeated story of greed and corruption. One can see the same corruption in modern Christianity, where the corruption of power and wealth has grown into a financially oppressive influence on its followers. Gospel events take place during the 1st century and are centered around the Second Temple priesthood's sacrificial system and its laws. The first step in understanding the story is uncovering where Jesus came from, who he was, and the culture that raised him. Jesus was an Essene, raised in the Essene mystical tradition. He was trained in the law and temple tradition by Essene masters. These Essene, known as the Nazarene, established a remote monastery in the northern region of Judea, known as Galilee or Galilee. This monastery was like the one established at Qumran, and like the Qumran monastery, the Nazarene abandoned the location after completing their mission to bring down the temple and its sacrificial system. Later, people from the surrounding area took over the monastery, and it would become the village called Nazareth. However, this did not happen until after the 1st century, and long after Jesus' death. The monastery was located about 20 kilometers, or 12 miles, north of the Carmel mountain range, in the lush agricultural region surrounding the Lake of Gennesaret, commonly known in the Christian tradition as the Sea of Galilee. The Nazarene monastery was a stone's throw from Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. But wait a minute, isn't Bethlehem south of Jerusalem? Herein one finds the first break from the traditional narrative. There was in fact 2 Bethlehems at the time of Jesus' birth. The one known to Christians was located south of Jerusalem, while the other was located north of the Carmel mountain range. Miriam, known to Christians as Mary, was selected and carefully groomed by the Essene to sire a son with the unquestionable blood lineage that would enable Jesus' birthright initiation into the temple's priesthood. However, Miriam was no minor player in the Essene conspiracy. Far from being the simple peasant girl of Christian myth, Miriam was in fact selected and groomed to attract a temple priest into marriage. The conspiracy's plan for Miriam was specifically designed to produce a son qualified to legally address the temple's laws and customs. Why the conspiracy? The Essene had long been at odds with the ruling temple priests. The dispute between the two factions began heating up around the time of the Hasmonean dynasty, some 150 years before Jesus. The Essene claimed the ruling Hasmonean priests had corrupted the law and its teachings. While there were many legal and religious issues involved, the primary disagreement between the two factions was the temple's blood sacrifice. It was this issue that led to the birth of Jesus and the fall of the Second Temple. The Essene were vegetarians. Like many other mystical traditions, they believed in the sanctity of all life, especially animal life. By contrast, the temple priests made their living off the slaughter of animals, and the blood sacrifice was, indeed, a very lucrative business for the temple. Another issue was the treatment of women. The patriarchal system that ruled the temple viewed women and children as chattel, that is, property owned and controlled by males. Boys were free of this restriction when they reached the legal adult age at 13. Under the temple's traditional patriarchal system, women had no rights. They could not own property and could not enter into a legal contract. A woman could not divorce her husband, yet a husband could legally divorce his wife simply by posting a public notice of the divorce. As such, traditional Jewish women of the 1st century were totally dependent on a male representative for their survival. Without a male representative, women of that era were reduced to a short, miserable life of either slavery or prostitution. The Torah, in this case the first 5 books of Moses, known to Christians as the Pentateuch, is filled with stories about women trying to secure a male representative. Stories like those of Tamar and Rebekah and her son Jacob are all about this issue peculiar to Judean patriarchal society. By contrast, the Essene placed no such restrictions on their women. In fact, Essene women were respected members of the community that held ranking positions, like that of community leader, priestess, and teacher. There is no doubt that some of Jesus' teachers were women masters of the Essene mystical tradition. Jesus' fair and equitable treatment of women was regarded as scandalous by the patriarchal temple priests and their followers. Far from being a simple peasant girl, Jesus' mother Miriam was trained in the Essene traditions. She was selected for her profound beauty and instructed in the art of allure and seduction that would make her irresistible to a temple priest. After her birth, Miriam's father had given the girl to the temple in lieu of the blood sacrifice that was required for all children who YHVH claimed as his own until redemption by blood sacrifice. Miriam remained in temple servitude, where she was trained as a weaver. It was in this role she worked on the temple's veil, hung in the Holy of Holies. Around the age of 9, Miriam was redeemed by the Essene and taken to their Nazarene monastery. There she was trained in the art of cosmetology, a skill that included hairdressing. Miriam combined her weaving skills with her hairdressing skills to become a noted hair weaver known to the women of Jerusalem. This explains the various claims made about Miriam. Among these claims is that she was a weaver or perhaps a hairdresser. Jewish sources claim that Miriam was a harlot, a prostitute. Can you see how these various claims fit into the story presented here? And so it was in this role Miriam returned to Jerusalem, where she would meet a temple priest named Yosef, known to Christians as Joseph. The name means he will add, and indeed, Yosef will contribute a very special addition to the temple with his son, Jesus. In the Christian tradition, Yosef is described as a carpenter. However, the translated word can mean either carpenter or stonemason. The Second Temple remained under construction until its destruction in 70 AD. The primary temple construction trades, as you might suspect, were that of stonemason and carpenter. The temple, provided by far the most lucrative paying employment, as it was the largest, most grandiose project anywhere in the region, surpassing all of Herod's other grandiose construction projects, including his own palaces. However, there was an unusual catch for those wishing to work on the temple project. One had to be a temple priest to work within the confines of the temple walls. It was in his role as a priest that Joseph was employed as either a carpenter or stonemason. It was for this reason Joseph was chosen by Miriam to father her son, as her own priestly blood lineage combined with Joseph's priestly bloodline would make Jesus an unquestionable, indisputable candidate for membership in the temple's Brotherhood of the Cut. It was here Jesus would make his indelible mark. Thus, the primary issue in the story is about blood. However, more than just blood, the story is about the laws that govern the legal issues concerning blood. The story of Jesus has three main points: law, blood, and sacrifice. The next video is about Jesus' main adversary, the temple. This video will tell the story of the religious structure that led to Jesus' blood sacrifice on the cross. Note: while video and audio contain AI elements, script content is completely human-generated. There is no AI-generated script or script editing included in the narration.